Hey, Roger Whitney here, host of the Retirement Answer Man podcast. For a while now, we've been posting the audio to our award-winning podcast, but starting, right now, we're going to be doing weekly video episodes where we'll have episodes of answering your questions on how to rock retirement. And we're also going to be bringing on experts to noodle on how to plan your retirement successfully. So I encourage you to subscribe to the podcast. I imagine there's a subscribe button around here so you can check out these weekly episodes. To start us off, I'm going to bring on the pretty incredible Wade Pfau, founder of Retirement Researcher blog, because we're going to talk a little bit about his new book, Retirement Planning Guidebook, which is really a must-have book reference guide if you want to rock retirement. And Wade and I are going to talk about tax management in retirement, your Social Security claiming strategy. So let's go start this off and chat with the incredible Wade Pfau. Welcome to the Retirement Answer Man show. My name is Roger Whitney. I'm your host, and this is the show dedicated to helping you not just survive retirement, but rock retirement. Now, we are on this month-long theme of tax management in retirement, and we have, is it Dr. Wade Pfau with me? Is it doctor? Should I call you a doctor?
Technically speaking. I don't usually use that title. But.
Yeah. Wade Pfau from Retirement Researcher. He is a professor of retirement income at the American College. He is director of the RICP program, which I don't have. I have the IRMAA. I think the RICP is the one I haven't done. And this is a geeky designation for retirement planners. He is founder of the Retirement Researcher blog, which is awesome, and author of numerous books, but the most recent, the Retirement Planning Guidebook. Now, Wade, I actually have, I believe, 100 of these in my office.
Yes, you can thank Kevin Lyles for that.
Yeah, Kevin Lyles, who is retirement coach in the Rock Retirement Club. We have our retirement rodeo roundup in Fort Worth, Texas later this month, and he is gifting them to everybody. That's how much he loves this book. And I think it's because he's acknowledged in it. I think that's really the reason.
Well, he proofread it for me, so I'm very indebted to him. I thought I had found all my mistakes, and then he had a look and was finding one per page, so I've got to thank him.
He's wonderful. And it's amazing, even if you hire proofreaders, a professional proofreader, that's a job, a skill.
Yes, I had one of those who did not do a very good job.
Yeah,
I found 2 or 3 mistakes per page, and then he found another mistake per page. But now it's been in good shape since it was published. Only one typo has come in from a reader.
That's awesome, and it's amazing how much I abuse things all the time in order to get points across. So I'm a lot less detailed on those things than you are, definitely, Kevin. And so I want to talk a little bit about your book, Wade, and I also want to wrap in this theme of tax management in retirement. And so I thought of a book when I was preparing for this, Wade, and you have young children of different ages. And do you remember the book when a little bug went ka-choo, the Dr. Seuss book?
Not right off the top of my head.
Okay. So it's the Dr. Seuss book, and it starts off with a little bug somewhere out in the wilderness that sneezes. And then the story follows everything that happens as a result of that bug sneezing. So at the beginning, the bug sneezes, which causes like an acorn to drop, and the acorn drops and hits, I think, a bird's toe, and the bird gets mad and he kicks something, and on and on and on, until at the end of the book, I think there's some huge parade in a city across the world. So essentially, it's showing the ripple effects of decisions or things that happen. Chaos theory, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking of that book in reading your book, because you have, and this is the most extensive retirement guidebook I've ever read. So bravo to you. It's very detailed. And each one of these decisions we have to make, whether it's Social Security claiming strategy as an example, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, there are ripple effects. When you're retirement planning, it's a multi-factor project that you're moving on. And I was thinking in retirement planning, you don't just have one bug sneezing or one decision that you make that has ripples. You actually have all these different bugs sneezing, and all these ripples can collide at different times and at different impacts that can affect the bottom line, right? How do you navigate that?
That's always been the challenge, that you can't really speak about any of these aspects purely in isolation, but at some level you have to talk about like Social Security claiming, long-term care, tax planning, but it is important to keep in mind they all interconnect too, and to look at those interconnections, because a decision you make with one part of your financial plan impacts a number of other parts of your financial plan as well. So it is a challenge.
I mentioned this one recently. I was working on a client case, and they had a huge concentrated position, and they had just retired. So we had this issue of the risk of that, right? And diversifying it caused a lot of capital gains, which caused them not to receive ACA credits. And it was trying to balance out, is it worth not getting those credits in order to diversify? Which one's the bigger risk or the bigger impact? In your research, how do you factor that in to navigate that? Because there really is no right answer, I guess, right?
Right, and it depends, of course, on the assumptions about what's going to happen in the future and everything else. And it may be the case in some circumstances, it's worth sacrificing those credits at least for a year or two to get a better long-term effect. But you really have to work through on a case-by-case basis to see whether the benefits outweigh the costs or vice versa in any given scenario.
This makes me think of a different book, Annie Duke's How to Decide. Have you ever read that?
I've not read that one.
Yeah, and
I've heard of it.
And she makes the point of when you're making decisions, it's not like chess evidently is a very defined game. If you lose a game of chess, you can actually go back to the move, right? Because it's a very constrained game, and almost all decisions aren't like chess. What she would argue is it's a lot like poker, where and obviously she's a poker player, a famous poker player, of if you think in an organized way, you can make the exact right decision based on the information you have. And because of the cards that come up in the deck and what players do, you can still lose. And so when you're doing this research, how do you, I guess you just have to be comfortable with it. Hey, you could be wrong on this. In fact, you won't get it right. You just have to make your best judgment call or guess. And your book helps them think in an organized way about that.
Right. And then also thinking about there's a whole distribution of possible outcomes. And so are you going to focus more on the average outcome of your decision, or focus more on protecting in the worst case scenarios for your decision? So even when you make that decision, it depends on what sort of risk you want to manage versus the potential for return as well.
So when you're navigating this to create a retirement income plan, what is your opinion on what you should focus on in terms of, is it the average? Is it, Monte Carlo and all the different possibilities, or is it safety first? I know you've written a book about that. Where have you come to right now in your career on what you should solve for?
Well, actually, I have a newer answer for that based on research that Alex Mergie and I have been doing about the retirement income style awareness, which is because there is no right answer to that question, but the right answer really depends on your personal preferences and style. And so to help people first understand that indeed, if you are more of a thinker in terms of safety first, wanting contractual protections, not wanting to rely on the stock market to fund your retirement, you would focus more on worst case scenarios or the performance in a bad type scenario, versus if you are more probability based, more focused on, or having more comfort with relying on market growth, then you may tend to make your decision more on an average outcome. And so just helping people understand in their personal situation which is the right direction to go, I think is very important, because everyone's going to have a different answer for it.
And so and I think that's really important. because it is, you have most everybody focuses on the quantitative aspect of it, right? How funded you are, right? So I have a client right now who's way overfunded for retirement. So quantitatively, just do a systematic withdrawal rate because you have so much excess assets. And to your point, and like we had Alex in the Rock Retirement Club to talk about this profile tool that you have when it was in development, actually. And in their case, the quantitative answer isn't right because these qualitative aspects, they don't want to. They would rather just feel comfortable about their life, right? Even though they should, even without these protections.
Right. In that kind of overfunded scenario where you're unlikely to ever run out of money no matter what you do. Still, if you are more safety first, commitment oriented, you don't have to carve off a big portion of your assets, but you might just feel more comfortable overall if you do build some sort of protected income floor and not leave it all exposed to the market. And that might even give you more confidence to invest more aggressively with the rest and support a larger legacy in the long run. Versus if you're more probability-based, optionality-oriented, you just, okay, I'm never going to run out of money. I'll invest it in a well-diversified, multi-asset class, aggressive investment portfolio and be fine. It really depends on whether you're comfortable with one or the other, and then you can build a strategy around that.
Yeah, and then they're not mutually exclusive, right? The optionality, preference, and safety. There's if you think of safety, let's call it a zero here in total optionality, which I guess would be systematic withdrawal rate over here. If those are the extremes, right? I take everything and buy guaranteed payments, or I do all, on one extreme, or I do all systematic withdrawal on the other extreme. There's a whole range in between there. It's like a big dial. Would you argue that it's important to secure, some people have called it the minimum dignity floor, or at least some base level before you even think about optionality?
At a personal level, I do think that's important, but I've now come to increasingly respect any decision with that. It's if you're focused on just risk-adjusted returns for your portfolio, if you have that optionality mindset, if you're probability-based, so you're comfortable relying on the market, then we have this idea in academics of the annuity puzzle about why don't people use more annuities. But the answer is some people, it's just not their style. So I wouldn't argue with anyone who has that style to say they should build a minimum dignity income floor. It's really up to the individual. So any option is okay if it's what works for you, as long as you're not making like extremely bad decisions. There's a lot of flexibility about how you approach building the retiring strategy, and different strokes for different folks.
And there's no one strategy that definitely works. So it's
right. There's no optimal strategy for everyone. And a lot of the financial planning community and or consumer media doesn't always agree with that idea. They do think there is one optimal strategy. And I see a lot of disagreement. Usually that's either everyone uses systematic withdrawals or everyone uses some sort of bucketing strategy. But at the end of the day, I think there are multiple different viable approaches, and it's important to find the one that you like best.
I think of a lot of it's like going to a doctor way. Like if I were to come to you and I have this pain, I got to solve my retirement income plan. As a consumer, I just want it fixed, right? I just want it fixed. So I'm looking to you, or say somebody to me, of just tell me what to do. I have this pain, make it go away in a very simple sense, right? And like the medical diagnosis and treatment, there is no magic pill.
Right. And well, there's a lot of uncertainty in the medical profession as well, but it may even be compounded in the financial profession just due to we don't know what future market returns are going to be, and so we can't really know in advance what type of strategy will work out best. So we've got to make decisions under that uncertainty, and that's where different people can move in a different direction just based on their personal preferences and style. So
I wonder, you mentioned the planning community, and I agree with you. having done it for, over 25 years. After 25, you just say over 25. You don't want to add it. I'm over 50. There's this desire from, say, the consumer, just tell me what to do. And there's the desire from, say, the planning community of, practically, I want a client, I need a client. And so there's this marketing, and marketing works if you say, I have the answer for you. Just follow me, you'll be okay, which is perhaps done from a good place, but not really true.
Yeah, to oversimplify things. And so that is indeed the case with some of the very large financial firms out there. They go with a particular direction with their marketing to present, this is the best solution for everyone. And that's indeed not necessarily the case. Not everyone's going to be comfortable with that solution being offered, whichever firm we're talking about.
And just like the pill that fixes your aches, it's attractive though from a consumer standpoint. I've become much more convinced that it's all about process and having an organized way of making decisions over and over again, so you can just keep iterating. It's a hard puzzle. So let's talk about taxes. How much, before we I want to talk about Social Security specifically, Wade, but how much should we make bets on what we think is going to happen with taxes in the future, since we're planning for 30 years? How much should we try to handicap tax policy?
My approach to looking at it is to just assume the current law extended into the future as really trying to base the analysis on that. If you then wanted to play with, well, what if Congress decides to raise the tax rates up another 10 or 15%? You could treat that as more of a scenario analysis of like testing, well, how robust is my plan to different types of things? So I would be okay with somebody also playing around with tax rates might be significantly higher in the future than they are today. But as a starting point, I'd want to make a lot of the decisions assuming current law, which current law does have an increase in the tax rates in 2026. So keep that in mind. But current law tax rates is where I would want to start the discussion.
Yeah, because if you don't have that plan of record with what you know reality is, you don't really have anything to create these what-if scenarios, right?
Right.
I find it interesting, like one of the most popular planning software platforms, it's the one I use, they actually don't have that sunset provision in the software. They just assume current tax law. I think that's the norm.
And that's a mistake, because it's not that far away where the tax rates are going to be significantly higher depending on your specific income. But because it's not just that the top tax rate will be higher, but now you're starting to get hit by higher tax rates at lower incomes as well. And so the overall tax bill can go up quite a bit starting in 2026.
Yeah, so if you start with current tax law, now you can create these what-if scenarios. And essentially, I guess what you're doing, Wade, is just teasing out more information to help you make your decision on your withdrawal strategy or whatever else, right? It's just really to help tease it out for you.
And the whole focus is always, it's the sad reality is we have to pay taxes, but we do have some control over when we pay taxes. And to try to take the medicine and pay the taxes at the lowest possible tax rates so that you're being taxed at a less overall level, to the extent that that then feeds in to allow your assets to do more for you with supporting more after-tax spending over your retirement and or more legacy at the end of retirement. That's the focus.
And I had to move my chair because I have a Great Dane, and I'm in my house, and he was whining because he couldn't go past it. He wants to lay down by me.
There he goes. I see him.
And so now I get my mind back on taxes. Michael Kitces said once in a meetup in the club that sometimes we think about taxes incorrectly, in that you're going to pay taxes. It's really just a timing question. Would you agree with that? So it's not avoiding taxes, it's just delaying taxes for the most part.
Right. It's working within the tax law, so nothing about illegally avoiding taxes, but just paying the taxes at the lowest possible rates. given the flexibility you have about when you can time certain distributions or certain decisions. And it ultimately will tend to be, I may want to pay some taxes today that I didn't necessarily have to pay, but I would do that because I can pay at a lower tax rate today. And then that will better position me that in the future, I can not be taxed at a higher rate for that income due to many different factors within the tax code that we can talk about in terms of the Social Security and the Medicare premium increases is really the two main issues to be thinking about.
Well, let's talk about Social Security. The traditional way of thinking about claiming decision for Social Security is the break-even point. If I take it at 62 versus my full retirement age, how long do I have to live for the crossover where one decision was better than the other? So it's a longevity question, really on the crossover of the total amount you've received. Do you agree with that approach in thinking about Social Security decision?
Well, I think that approach can work okay, but it's not the best starting point. I think that first, Social Security is incredibly valuable insurance. It provides an inflation-adjusted, government-backed lifetime income. And for the high earner in a couple, it also provides a survivor benefit so that that benefit will continue for the joint, whoever lives the longest in that couple. And so that provides a lot of value. And the break-even analysis is the other way to think about it, making it more like an investment decision. And the answer that comes out of that is usually right around age 80, especially when interest rates are lower. If you live past 80, it's worthwhile to delay Social Security. If you die before 80, you'd be, after the fact, you would have been better off claiming earlier. But the reality is 80 is still below most people's life expectancies. And so they have more than a 50% chance to benefit from delay. It's just when people start thinking about a break-even analysis, they tend to behaviorally start worrying, well, what if I die early and then I'm getting cheated out of my Social Security, which I think just isn't the best way to frame the decision. I would want to focus more on what if I live a long time to avoid poverty at old age? What should I do? And that's where delaying Social Security can really pay off and provide a lot more lifetime income, even hundreds of thousands of dollars more for somebody who's living into their 90s.
And so your view of thinking about Social Security is this is a longevity annuity, essentially. This is a inflation-adjusted secure payment, and that's how we should think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yeah, the best annuity money can buy. Because if you look at the decision to delay as like buying an annuity where the cost is the age 62 benefits you give up, you're so much better off than any commercial annuity you could buy with the same money.
That would be an interesting way to look at it is, okay, the money that I'm foregoing by not claiming Social Security, those are essentially like premium payments for this increased benefit.
77% more at age 70 versus 62.
That's a great purchase, even from a financial sense. How does the annuity claiming decision factor into tax planning? What ripples do you have if you claim early versus claiming later?
Right. There's some important ripples there because in the Social Security, that's where you have to somewhat treat things in isolation, but then you have to bring them together. So in the chapter on Social Security in the guidebook, I focus on these types of issues about just thinking about the claiming decision and generally emphasizing the value of thinking about at least the high earner delaying towards closer to age 70. Then when you overlay the tax, it's a whole nother host of reasons why delay can pay off. Because if you're somebody who's already retired in your 60s and you're delaying Social Security to 70, you may have this window where you don't have a lot of taxable income. And you might even be wasting 0% tax bracket space. It's like you want to pay, or you have to pay taxes, but if you can pay taxes at 0%, you want to generate some taxable income to do that and pay those taxes at 0%. And that's where by delaying Social Security, you can create a window to do more tax planning, which effectively will mean taking distributions from an IRA, and you can either spend that money or convert it to a Roth IRA, so that after Social Security begins, you can potentially be in a much better position where you there's this Social Security tax torpedo, which is where when you have taxable income, that can also uniquely trigger you to have to pay taxes on your Social Security benefits as well, so that you may think you're in the 22% federal tax bracket, But if a dollar of income is also making you pay taxes on it's 85% or 85 cents of a Social Security dollar as well, you thought you're in the 22% tax bracket, you're actually in the 40.7% tax bracket. That's the marginal tax rate that you're paying on that dollar of income. And so the ability to plan in advance for that may help you reduce those taxes and to pay taxes on less of your Social Security benefits. And that's one of the real tax planning values of thinking strategically, not just about the federal income tax rates, but on the specific, what's the tax I'm going to have to pay on each dollar of income, and trying to make that number as low as possible.
And so the idea of delaying Social Security outside of the awesome lifetime payment that you get is, hey, now it's going to create this window where I can do some things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then the option set would be, I guess you mentioned, withdraw from IRAs. So what are the benefits of if you're able to withdraw from IRAs early?
Well, it's taxable income.
Right.
And so you have to pay taxes on it. But the idea is you're paying taxes on it at a lower tax rate by taking it earlier. So your tax bill will be higher in your 60s. But overall, you're paying at lower rates so that overall, over your lifetime, you'll be paying less lifetime taxes and you'll have more spending power. That's the way I frame it in the book. I walk through a case study on this where a 60-year-old retiree looking at claiming 62 versus 70 for Social Security, and then also looking at different tax strategies. And between taking a 62 and following more of a conventional wisdom tax distribution approach, which is spend taxable first, then tax deferred, then tax free, that versus delaying Social Security to 70, paying taxes up to just below the second threshold where you get a higher Medicare premium from that until you turn 70, and then afterwards being able to manage a much lower income threshold for the rest of your life could extend the length of your portfolio to fund your retirement expenses by 5.6 years in the example that I show in the book. So that's the value there. You're paying more taxes early on, less taxes later on. Overall, you're extending your portfolio out another 5.6 years.
Or you're giving yourself more margin to spend money earlier.
Mm-hmm. Or you could,
more years. Right, yeah, you could touch the money.
You're in a better position, right? You could spend, if you just wanted to have the money last the same amount of time, yeah, you could spend more money in those early years as well as an alternative.
That little statement that you made right there is critical, because here's a couple things I heard as you were talking, Wade. One is you're going to pay more taxes early, and that's okay. And if you think of somebody that's retired, and you think of the average mindset of tax planning through accumulation years, I mean, I've had the conversations, I'm guessing you have too. Hey, Roger, if you do this, we're going to save this much in taxes for you this year. Mm-hmm. Right? And so tax planning generally is, save today. Don't worry about tomorrow. Right. Save today.
Yeah, accountants aren't always thinking this way. They usually want to minimize this year's tax bill. They don't understand the idea of paying more taxes today to minimize the lifetime tax bill.
And in the accumulation phase, like in your phase of life, you're a young guy, that makes sense because you have such a long timeline and you're building wealth. But in retirement, it's much more important to think in a multi-year way. So that's the first thing I heard. People struggle with that mentally. And I know in a lot of CPAs that I work with to coordinate, they get it once they think through it, but it's not their default, right?
Right.
The other thing I heard was another ripple of, if you're going to take money out of an IRA, you still have to think about this other bug over here, which is IRMAA, right? The surcharges on Medicare, because you don't want to kick that in. That's some of that multi-factor aspect of it. And then one thing that you didn't say that I think also applies to that, right, would be if you're able to take money out at age 65 and pay up to the 12% bracket, you've lowered the increased value of your IRA over time, because then you have RMDs that are going to kick in, right?
Yeah, you're getting better set up for the RMDs later. And if you're someone whose adjusted gross income tends to be more in the ballpark of, say, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, that's where this kind of tax planning can really help a lot with the Social Security tax torpedo. If you're someone whose adjusted gross income tends to be more in the like $200,000 plus range, you're probably going to be paying taxes on 85% of your Social Security, and there's not much you can do about it. But that's where the IRMAA, the Medicare, increased premiums on Medicare based on income, will play a much bigger role, and you might be able to save thousands of dollars a year just on Medicare premiums with some careful planning where those are cliffs or thresholds where if I have $1 too much, the first threshold, a single individual is paying $860 more in Medicare for the year if they have $1 too much of income. So it's an 86,000%.
Just $1. It's not.
It's an 86,000% marginal tax rate on that $1. And then for a couple, that doubles to $1,720 more tax if you're $1 above the threshold where the Medicare premium increase kicks in.
Yeah, when we think about a cliff, just to be clear, it's not that incrementally all of a sudden something happens to you because you crossed a line. It literally, and the reason I guess we use the cliff metaphor is no. When you jump off the cliff, everything changes and you're totally impacted. Every dollar from $1 is impacted, not just the incremental dollar over that line. Yeah,
right, it's the $1 above the line gives you another $860 of premiums on your Medicare. So, and then it's just for that $1 because then it goes back the next dollar. You're back to the old marginal tax rate. And then another factor that like related to the Social Security and the Medicare is also how long-term capital gains taxes work, where they have a different set of tax rates and tax thresholds. And so when I have another dollar of ordinary income, my long-term capital gains get stacked on that, and that might push one of those dollars of long-term capital gains from, say, the 0% tax bracket to the 15% tax bracket, or later on to the 20% tax bracket, and then with a 3.8% additional tax there, and tax reform now possibly looking at a 25% top capital gains bracket. That it's the same effect where back to, I thought I was in the 22% federal tax bracket. I have another dollar of income that generates tax on 85 cents of a dollar of Social Security, and that also pushes a dollar of my long-term capital gains from 0% to a 15%. My 22% tax bracket is now actually over 55% on that dollar. And that's the issue that we're trying. So it's not just what is the federal income tax rate, it's what taxes am I actually paying when I factor in the Social Security and the Medicare, the long-term capital gains, the 3.8% surcharge, and all these different aspects of the tax code that don't work. We could say like linear. They're not linear. They're not just stepping up on a linear basis. There are these jumps and falls and all these weird things that can happen in the tax code. And that's what we're trying to control with this tax planning, by paying taxes in advance to better avoid these kinds of problems later.
And then if you retired prior to age 65 and you're trying to solve for, say, ACA tax credits, which can be substantial. So have you done any modeling on that ripple of which one's worth more, managing the tax brackets or getting these sometimes substantial ACA tax credits for healthcare?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I focused more on Medicare in the book. And actually with Medicare, it's your income from 2 years prior. So if you're going to start Medicare at 65, it's actually your adjusted gross income at 63 that's going to start affecting whether you pay more Medicare premiums. I do talk about the Affordable Care Act, the subsidy issue there. We do have that temporary, in 2021, 2022, there's no longer a cliff. It's more phased out. But in most states, starting again in 2023, if you have $1 above 400% of the federal poverty line for your household, you lose all your subsidy. And that's another cliff where there's a $1 of income causes a big drop. If you think of that subsidy as part of the loss of that subsidy as a tax, effectively, you're suddenly paying a lot more tax. I haven't specifically tried to model that, but I think that ultimately gets into, depending on, every case is different. That's why it's hard to talk about general tax planning principles. But you might find it's worth sacrificing that subsidy in a few years if that gives you a lot of long-term benefit. But it's really hard to generalize it. You've really got to look at that on a case-by-case basis.
Wade, I want the magic pill. Come on, man. Just give me the pill.
I wish I could give it to you.
So we're starting to see these ripples and how they're colliding with each other, right? And my guess is you don't get to the right answer, right? You just get to something that feels you try to tease out by, one, using the current tax code as way you say, and then two, creating these what-if scenarios to just tease out some more information so you can make a judgment call.
Because the other big important variable that you don't know is future market returns. Yeah. The better markets perform, the more your future I mean, this is a good thing, but the more your future distributions are going to push you into higher tax brackets. And so that's a consideration as well. And so as you change the assumption you make about future market returns, that would change kind of the mathematical solution about what sort of tax management you should be doing today.
Yeah, so you're not going to figure this out. You're just going to have to
move in the right direction.
Things. Yeah, move in the right direction and iterate, right? Just iterate based on new tax code. Now, Wade, have you thought about, I know from having I'll use the safety first approach as the name for it. Have you done any research on, when we're making these decisions, we're making them based on who we are. So you take like a 63-year-old, they're making these decisions on claiming Social Security and safety first versus systematic withdrawal. We're making these decisions, and I guess it's just a human nature that we always think we're going to be exactly like we are right now. But in fact, when you're 73 or 74 or 80, cognitively, energy-wise, everything is going to be different. So how do you factor that into some of these decisions? Have you thought about that?
That will affect your spending and whether or not it's reasonable to incorporate the idea that you may spend less as you get older outside of healthcare or long-term care expenses, just because you're starting to slow down and not traveling as much or going out to eat as much and that sort of thing. And then that also affects different types of investment decisions. One of the chapters that I spend a lot of time with too is like it's not just estate planning, but estate and incapacity planning, and helping to make sure you have all the paperwork in place to help with the situation where cognitively you may be losing things and may need some help. And so having that financial power of attorney in place and having instructions to your family members about things that you were planning to do, or like if you've been saving your HSA account and you have a whole stack of receipts that people can use to take out the deductions tax-free, you need to make sure your family members know about that, or otherwise...
That's a great example.
It's a really bad account to leave to beneficiaries if they don't have the receipts to draw from it without having to pay the tax all within 1 year as a distribution. So you need to plan in advance for those types of issues as well. And that can also affect investment type decisions as well, with just... I may be comfortable with a total return investing strategy, but am I comfortable I can continue to manage and maintain that with age?
And one reason why that's a great example, that HSA example. You don't want to leave that to beneficiaries. So when we're thinking about tax planning and income planning, Social Security is one of those. It's a bigger decision, right? Because it's sort of like a pension. It's not revocable. For the most part, right? You're making a permanent decision that has these ripples. Are there any other more permanent decisions that we need to make sure that we don't miss?
In Social Security, when you add up the lifetime benefits, it can be more than $1 million. So a lot of people may be millionaires and not realize it, which is also important. Medicare has a lot of decisions that have some element of irrevocableness. Like if you don't sign up in time, you may have to go through a window where you don't have any primary health insurance, which if you end up having a health issue, could be a dramatic problem. The Medicare supplement issue is important because if you don't get a Medicare supplement in your initial enrollment period, you may be subject to underwriting in the future. And so you can't, like the comprehensive Plan G Medicare supplement Somebody can't just say, well, I'll use Medicare Advantage until I start to get more sick and have higher health bills. Then I'll move over and get that comprehensive Plan G supplement, because at that point you may be ineligible for it. And so if it is something you want, it may be important to, even though if you're still perfectly healthy today, to pay those higher premiums just to get it locked in so that you have it in the future. And that's another one. Yeah, there's certainly a lot of other irrevocable type decisions, especially if you have a traditional defined benefit pension plan through your employer, where you have to make that lump sum decision or take the lifetime income from it. That would be irreversible. That might affect other employee or employer benefits as well, that you want to double check and make sure the interaction, back to the issue of interactions, the decision you make there could affect whether or not you or maybe another family member is eligible for the retiree health insurance program from that employer. And so
let's actually hit on that one for a second if we can. I wasn't planning on it, but I'm surprised after doing the podcast for almost 8 years. Should I take the lump sum or the payment is probably the most asked question I get, which really surprises me.
Yeah, I don't do that as much. I think there's not as many pensions anymore, but
yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's why it surprises me. I'm like, really? There's that many people? Well, because it definitely is a high stakes decision, right? You can't undo it. I have my opinion, but I'm much more interested in yours. How do you?
Well, I think it's it's going to vary case by case, but certainly to the extent, like I was saying before, my style is more income protection. So I would want to give a serious look at taking the lifetime income provision instead of the lump sum provision. But I mean, there's a lot of factors that can go into that. And the first I mentioned is just make sure to talk with the HR department and understand how that decision may impact other employer benefits. Look at, well, if I did take the lump sum and I used it to buy a commercial annuity, would I be able to get more income that way or less income that way? And that would give me a sense of whether or not, like, some companies might shift how they do that payout to try to encourage a certain direction. So if the lump sum is very high relative to the payout, it might be better to take the lump sum and then buy a commercial annuity with it instead of just taking the lifetime pension. You may want to think about, are you worried about the employer's future ability to cover those pensions? And would your pension be high enough that it might fall outside of the threshold of being fully covered through the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation? Those are some of the key factors.
And in almost every case, I've never seen the ability to replicate the payment in the private, from buying an immediate annuity, say, outside. I've never seen that. Plus, I've never seen that be able to recreate it.
Yeah, if the lifetime income from the pension is much better than what you could get by taking the lump sum to a commercial annuity provider, then that would strongly speak to taking the pension lifetime income as a starting point.
And you've pointed this out earlier, but also I've seen a lot of your stuff is that if you take the pension payment plus delay Social Security, you're going to have this natural current in your life of guaranteed income. Mm-hmm. Maybe we undervalue the fact that this allows us to make different decisions with our money, right? In terms of whether it's investment risk or spending the money on the lake house or whatever. We don't really think about that by having this, I'm free to do all this other stuff.
Right. It's very important. And I described this in the book with the retirement care analysis, where care is capacities, aspirations, realities, and emotional constraints. But we're talking about capacity now, and it's the idea of risk capacity. How vulnerable are you to like a downturn in the financial markets? If you're delaying Social Security, if you have a traditional pension, you may have sufficient reliable income sources that even if there's a stock market downturn, it's not really going to disrupt your core lifestyle in retirement. That means you have more risk capacity, which means if you want, you don't have to, but if you want, you can invest more aggressively and have the potential for just seeing your assets grow because you're not as exposed to the downside of that, which is if markets went down, it's not going to curtail your ability to enjoy retirement.
Yeah, because absent that stream of income, and the IRMAA certification, their way of addressing this is if I don't have, say, $60,000 a year of income, say, through a pension, well, you're going to have to build your floor on the front end to, basically build a payroll reserve to cover that for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, which means that money could have been invested or could have been repurposed for something else. And by having the payment, you're free to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was curriculum director for the IRMAA for a brief period around 2012, and I think it's a great designation, but definitely you should also think about the RICP as an alternative. I think it's a lot more comprehensive. The RMA is more like that first build a floor, then exposed to upside. I think that's one. It's a retirement style. Like we would call that more like income protection in the retirement income style awareness. But there are other alternatives too.
I need I need more letters behind it. Well, Wade, I'm excited. The book is Retirement Planning Guidebook. Retirement Planning Guidebook, yeah. And we'll have links to it, obviously, in the show notes. But I'm excited that next month in the Rock Retirement Club, we're actually going to do a little book study on it.
Okay,
We're really excited about that.
Wonderful.
And you're going to come in after the book study, so everybody's versed to be able to just ask you questions directly. So that'll be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to do that.
Wade, thanks so much for hanging out with me, and I will talk to you all here in about 5 more days when the next episode comes out. Bye, everybody.
Okay, thank you.